Hello, my name is Mark Dietrich. I'm the chair of the steering committee of the Alliance for American Rule of Law, otherwise known as AAROL, which is a group of American lawyers who have practiced in working on the rule of law internationally and abroad, and mostly with United States Agency for International Development support. We are a group of lawyers who are now turning our attention to the rule of law in the United States, which we see as being under threat here. And we're also concerned about attacks on judicial independence in this country, both rhetorical and physical threats that have been made against judges in this country. As a part of our work, we are interviewing various experts from overseas to see what their experience can inform us about how we should respond in the United States. And I'm very pleased to be joined today by Adam Bodnar, who is a Polish expert in the rule of law and in human rights. Adam formerly was the ombudsman for Poland, and in 2023, he was appointed the Minister of Justice for Poland, a post which he left 3 months ago. And he is still a sitting senator in the Polish parliament, and we're very pleased that he's able to join us here in the studio today. Thank you, Adam.
Thank you, Mark, for invitation. It's my real pleasure to be here with you and to share my thoughts about rule of law.
Great. I'd like to start by examining, if you don't mind telling our viewers about the progression of the rule of law in Poland. We know that when the Berlin Wall came down in 1989, Poland had previously, for the past 60, 70 years, been living under a socialist communist regime. Tell us about the process of building up the rule of law post at the end of the Cold War. Briefly.
I'm smiling that you started with fall of the Berlin Wall, because interestingly, it is regarded in Central Europe as the start of changes. But in fact, everything started with so-called roundtable talks between the communists and Solidarity movement leaders already in February 1989. And just after those roundtable talks, we had partially free elections on 4th of June 1989. And thereafter, we started the process of the transformation. So then Berlin Wall collapsed. But it is quite interesting that this, like the general international perception is a little bit different regarding this. But basically, maybe I will just use this opportunity to say what happened during those roundtable talks. These were talks designed to project a new system of government for Poland. It was the moment when communists decided to share the power with Solidarity movement. I think at that time they did not predict that they will lose the power. So it was this kind of a way of transforming the Poland in a peaceful way. But interestingly, part of those discussions were judicial reforms. So it was obvious to everybody that if the state has to re-emerge or emerge in a new version after elections, after those roundtable talks, it should be the state which is governed by the rule of law. So it means that judiciary should be independent. There should be some oversight concerning judicial appointments, that law should be treated seriously, that people should have access to remedies, and that basically the institutions are designed to deprive authorities of arbitrary and discretionary power, that everything should be based on law, but the law should be in compliance with basic constitutional principles. And in fact, what has been designed in 1989 was later on implemented by virtue of changes to the constitution, and later on by the Constitution of 1997, and finally by joining the European Union. So that was like this big step for the not for the mankind, but for sure for the, let's say, Polish kind
Right.
at that time. So this 2004 was, and at that time we thought that it is, I would say, to a great extent like the end of history, that we are there already. So we have a liberal democracy, we are the market economy, we have the rule of law, we are the member of this European club. But it appeared that it is not the end of story, that we are going to have some further problems with judiciary and rule of law standards.
What was the transition from the communist socialist era to the post-communist era? What were the hallmarks of an independent judiciary that Poland was able to establish? What were the most important components or aspects of that, do you think?
I think that the most important was creation of total independence of judiciary from the political process. So just to give you some understanding, in the communist era, it was quite obvious that even if you are a judge, you may always get a phone from the Communist Party asking for a certain verdict, especially if you are a criminal judge. Even if you don't get that phone call, you basically knew what are the limits of your power. So that you are more kind of like a law clerk than like a real judge. And 89 meant that we are creating like the judiciary in a serious way, that judges are independent and the process of judicial appointments is independent. But the second part of it was that judiciary should serve citizens, especially in terms of market economy. And here, to be honest, we failed because, of course, judiciary transformed itself, but even until today, we have a problem with efficiency of judiciary. I think we did not appreciate how important it is to build strong, resilient, and efficient judiciary, and not just institutionally independent. So somehow we invested a lot of time and energy in building independence of judges, in securing all proper issues regarding remuneration, retirement, constitutional guarantees, proper organization of judiciary, but we didn't think enough about that at the end of the day, judges should deliver on results, that they should be effective in how they do, and courts should be simply accountable of how they administer justice. I think that was a big mistake because this mistake, this underappreciation, had significant consequences later on. So when politicians started to attack judiciary, somehow Polish people started to think, okay, yeah, of course, those judges, they are not doing well. Courts are not subject of huge public trust. We have to wait, years for important judgments in our cases. So it was much easier for populists to attack judiciary. So people at the end of the day did not take care about whether judges are independent or not, but whether how they assess the performance of judiciary. Of course, it was a long process because I don't claim that nothing good happened in the Polish judiciary, but this process of transformation was time-consuming and was quite fragmented. And also, at certain point, we've realized that this taking about this institutional independence is creating a little bit like the ivory tower for Polish judges. That they are also not only less effective, but also they are very much distanced from the society. And once again, portraying judges as part of the elite is the best way to attack judges and to destroy the judicial independence. So politicians, populists, they exactly knew how to undermine trust into the judiciary in order to achieve their own political purposes.
And were those attacks against the judiciary effective? And did that contribute to the Law and Justice Party coming into power in 2015, I think it was?
I wouldn't say that it was like the major point in the electoral process in 2015. But for sure, it was one of those points that have been underlined by opposition at that time. That listen, we are going to to get rid, maybe not get rid, but we are going to make an order with this group of people which is not really serving justice. So we are going to be those ones who will provide for the proper reform of the judiciary. And when they started to tell it, and at the same time you experienced a situation that people are really waiting years for making a final judgment in the case, it was one of those proper points. To be honest, if I would be not an expert at that time, not a human rights defender at that time, I would also agree, because I also had a lot of let's say negative thoughts about Polish judiciary at that time. But simply the solution that has been offered by me and my friends at the time was a little bit different. So we thought that it is all about making like the step-by-step organic reform of the judiciary, investing into proper procedures, into the IT development, into the court administration. And I think the proposal that has been made by the Law and Justice was rather, we are going to get here with a hammer, and we are going to make the new order here. And interestingly, when they have started reforms in 2016, there was a very special moment, I would say, and I would like here to underline this, like how certain words play a role. So there was one judge who made such a statement during one of the public conferences. She said something like this, that, dear judges, we are a little bit like a special extraordinary case, because we are educated so well for so many years that in order to provide justice, and because of this, we should be protected and supported by the state and by the population. Okay, so she meant a proper thing. She had like the good intention. But what happened is that the populists, Law and Justice Party, started to use the word cased by describing the Polish judiciary. So listen, so these are those people who are extraordinary cased, which means that they are above all, that they are above the people, which means that we must destroy that kind of a picture. We must destroy that kind of an image of judges, that they should be accountable to the public. And thanks to that kind of a narrative, it was much easier to make different kinds of smear campaigns, hate campaigns against judges, but also to project changes in the legislation that were aiming towards restricting judicial independence. So I mean here that sometimes words may matter. Words may create a completely different discourse on the judiciary, especially if those words are put on fertile ground, so they may create a completely different story than even the author of certain words expected.
Very interesting. Listening to you describe that, I'm thinking about kind of the role of civic education and the role of judges in civic education, and the need for judges really around the world to not be so distant, but to convey to the citizens, their citizens, the work that they are doing in an understandable way, and not to be kind of above the communicating with people.
You're right, and basically when we faced this challenge of attack on judicial independence, Polish society and Polish civil society and Polish judges realized that they should that they should have a different function in the society. That their role is not only to adjudicate cases and just to forget about what is happening around them, but they should be more open to the society, and they should be involved into different forms of civic education by themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Not only because they are experts, not because they know how to make a case, how to judge the case, they know procedures, but also in order to create this closeness to citizens. That citizens should feel that judges are not some extraordinary people who are somewhere in some apartments, blocks, houses far away from the society, but they are among us. They are just regular members of the society who are also making, shopping in groceries, who are driving the same car, who are using public transportation. And for example, one of the activities that Polish judges did was organization of meetings and mock trials during rock festivals. So can you imagine that you are going to a rock festival, you are going to see your favorite hip hop or rock and roll band, and of course concerts are in the evenings. But during the day, you are staying at this festival, and there is nothing to do. And suddenly you see that there is a camp. There is a tent made by Polish judges, and they are organizing a mock trial there. And they are sitting, of course, not in their robes, not with all those chains, but they are just sitting like in a regular T-shirt, and they are just adjudicating some like a regular, I don't know, hate speech case or some case of some physical violence. And moreover, they are able enough, to engage people from the audience to be witnesses, to be, representatives of parties. So they know how to play this kind of a game with the people, and they may show that, they could be closer to citizens. That making and moreover, after adjudicating the case, they are explaining why they did such and such decision, what are the pros and cons of a certain judgment. So you could see, and of course, it was maybe not made on a massive scale, because you don't have rock festivals every day. But the mere fact that you have a real judge who is there, who is sitting with people, who is making this mock trial, who is also engaged into different other seminars, discussions, explanations, what is his role, was already bringing judges closer to citizens. And I think we are living in those times that judges cannot count that politicians would support them. Of course, politicians should do this. I do this, being a politician. But in order to have it, you must understand how the judiciary operates. You must understand why is it so important for the public debate and for the general democratic picture. But at the end of the day, it is not like this kind of attractive political messaging. In times of radicalization and polarization, you tend to attack somebody. And
Right.
And with judiciary, it might be like this, that they become a little bit like scapegoats in terms of a political discourse. So it means that judges must take more responsibility on themselves in terms of communicating properly their judgments, decisions, but also in terms of reaching out to regular citizens by either NGOs, civil society groups, or by organizing their own activities, also sometimes by using social media. But of course, there is like this this special point that they should not cross a certain line of being involved too much into the public discourse, because if they are going too far, then they risk losing this highest value, which is the judicial independence. So it is a little bit like a tricky thing, how to make this public awareness education, but at the same time not to lose your integrity and total independence of a judge. But still, I would argue that judges just staying in courtroom, it's not what should happen these days in times of social media, in times of such huge expectation that citizens understand how judiciary operates.
I wanted to ask also about the political aspects of being a judge. In this country right now, judges are being attacked both rhetorically and being threatened with physical violence as well for decisions that they are making that one political party views as going against the interests of the other political party. Did that happen in Poland, and what was the response of the judges and the public to that?
Sure, that kind of pressure happens, especially in those countries that are suffering through, this, let's say, illiberal disease. And in Poland, on the one hand, pressure on judges were orchestrated. So, for example, I remember more or less 2017, when one of the state-owned foundations ordered a campaign which was called so-called Black Billboards campaign, and on those campaign and during this campaign, judges were portrayed as being, people who delivered some wrongful judgments, or that were people that, as judges that were escaping some form of disciplinary liability, although they have committed some crimes or some petty crimes. So the moment when the state is orchestrating that kind of a campaign, and then it is repeated by media controlled by the state, it's really dangerous, because it is the state which is attacking its own institution. State
Right.
always should protect its own institutions. But also what happened is, on the one hand, attacking individual judges, and my predecessor, Minister of Justice Zbigniew Ziobro, was quite strong in that kind of articulation of some individual attacks. But I would say what was extremely horrible was reference to the personal life or the family life of some individuals who are of some judges. And of course, it was not done that much by politicians, but by some friendly related journalists. So I remember some situations where some judge gave a decision, and within a couple of hours or days, you could read the story of his father, or even sometimes grandfather, referring back, I don't know, to some communist past of some grandfather, or to some, I don't know, crimes that have been committed during the Second World War. So that was extremely painful, that you are a decent person, you are performing your work as a judge, you are educated properly, and you are really integral, and suddenly somebody is trying to offend you, to attack you, to intimidate you with the use of some family situations from the past, for which you cannot be responsible at all. I remember one very special situation. It was a very big. There was Polish judges and members of other professions like prosecutors and attorneys organized so-called Congress of Polish Lawyers. It was like a big congress, for more or less 2,000 persons attending. And I remember that there was during first of those congresses in, I think, 2017, there was a deputy minister of justice that appeared, who was from the ruling party at that time, and who started to say that those judges are post-communists, or they are affiliated with communist era. And it was so, and can you imagine that people basically started to leave the room? You know why? Not because, of course, they felt offended, but it was interesting that the medium age of judges at that time was 45. And all of them, most of them present during this Congress, were basically in the age where, in the communist era, maybe they were, I don't know, collecting matchboxes or Lego sets, okay? So they had nothing in common with communism except maybe for their childhood. So how can you offend them of being, post-communists when the whole adult life they were living in independent democratic Poland? So this rhetoric of offending was very much present. And of course, I think it's important to say how people responded to this. Because, of course, for a number of people, number of judges, it was basically just even, it increased their power to resist. It was kind of a motivation, incentive to go even stronger in presenting their independence and their fight for the rule of law. But there is another aspect of it, which is called chilling effect.
Mm-hmm.
And chilling effect means that you are restraining yourself from making some actions, being afraid of some potential negative consequences for you or your family. And please look that in Poland, this chilling effect had some connotation or some connection with the communist era. In the communist era, we had that kind of a saying that in order to kind of survive properly in accordance with your values, people were distancing themselves from politics, from public life. They were investing their time in so-called our small stabilization, which means that they were taking care about their families, about their hobbies, about their friends. But basically, they exactly knew what not to do in order not to cross the line and to get into some contact with the Communist Party or with the regime at that time. So it is a little bit like inside your anybody who had this, let's say, experience, or anybody who had parents living in the communist era, that you have this ability of being more or less silent, or not interfering, or knowing exactly limits of your behavior in order not to create a danger for yourself and for the family. You may name it opportunism, but you may name it also some kind of a strategy for survival. But of course, from the point of view of the democratic discourse, it is extremely dangerous, okay? Because if people distance themselves, if they close themselves, if they are not reacting properly in accordance with values they believe in, it might be detrimental to the whole democratic project. But fortunately, there were still quite many people that decided to resist, decided to protest, and that faced also disciplinary cases or even suspensions as judges for the thing that they for their statements or for their activity domestically or internationally.
You're talking mostly about individual judicial independence. There's also structural judicial independence, and I know the Constitutional Court plays an important role in Poland, akin to our Supreme Court here in the United States. What were some of the institutional assaults on judicial independence in that era?
It's great that you have started with the Constitutional Court, because in fact, in 2015, when the whole illiberal process started, we had totally independent, well-respected Constitutional Court composed of high-level lawyers. Sometimes, it has been even compared to the Bundesverfassungsgericht, to the German one, to the Austrian one. I even have my own story. Remember that more or less in 2015, I was delivering a speech in Brno, convincing the Czech judiciary about introducing some of the measures that were used by the Polish Constitutional Court. So it was we kind of we tended even to promote like our vision of the judicial review.
Mm-hmm.
But what happened in 2015, 2016 was the attack on the independence of the Constitutional Court by the Law and Justice Party. It was quite a complicated story, so maybe I will not go into details. There is a great book by Wojciech Sadurski, Poland's Constitutional Breakdown, so there is a detailed outcome how it happened. But basically there was a strategy of attacking and filling in the Constitutional Court with loyal judges. So people of lower quality, people who are more or less loyal to the new regime. And by the end of 2016, in fact, the Constitutional Court has been taken over. So we could, although people were protesting on streets, although there were a lot of statements by the European Commission, by number of Polish NGOs, although there were really massive protests on the streets, it has been taken. And interestingly, even Jarosław Kaczyński admitted that Constitutional Court was instrumental in pursuing some further changes. So for him, it was important to start the whole process of changing the legal system in Poland by stopping the authority of the Constitutional Court. So interestingly, when different laws have been adopted in 2016, 2017, there was nobody to react except for the people. So there was no institutional reaction because the Constitutional Court was already taken over and was not having the power to react. And then in 2017, the reforms concerning judiciary started. And please look that the Law and Justice didn't have a constitutional majority. So everything they wanted to achieve was with the use of the majority in both chambers of parliament and by signing of laws with loyal president coming from the same political camp. And this process of changes affected, I would say, three different levels. So one is how common courts operate. So who are court presidents? So court presidents are pretty crucial in terms of administration of justice in a given court, as well as they have impact on judicial career in a given court. So the procedure has been introduced in order to exchange all court presidents throughout whole Poland. And it happened just over a couple of months.
Mm-hmm.
So then it was about changing the composition of the Supreme Court. So please look, we have like three top courts: Supreme Court, Constitutional Court, and the Supreme Administrative Court. The Supreme Court is most relevant because it has impact on the validity of elections, but it has also the final say regarding criminal or civil cases. So what happened is that the composition started to change, but also two new chambers have been created in the Supreme Court. One chamber, so-called Extraordinary Control and Public Affairs Chamber, and the second, Disciplinary Chamber. So the first one was entrusted with the task to examine validity of elections. And maybe at that time we did not appreciate that much what does it mean for the future. Later on, we've learned that having like the top, let's say, electoral court under control is crucial for the democracy. And then, and second, disciplinary chamber that has been designed to more or less adjudicate cases of some disciplinary behavior against judges. And finally, there was a change concerning National Council of Judiciary. National Council of Judiciary is a major body responsible for the process of judicial appointments. It has been designed in those roundtable talks I mentioned before, interestingly by Jarosław Kaczyński himself, as a representation of judges who are basically sitting there and who have a major say of who is going to become like new judge.
Right.
And the legislation that has been adopted was pretty simple. So 15 members of the National Judicial Council were going to be appointed not by peers, by other judges, but by the parliament. Why? Because we should have more to say about accountability of judges, because it is the parliament that is representing voters, and the parliament should have a control over who is going to be selected to become a judge. So this kind of a populist almost language referring to the wish of voters has been used in order to change the composition of the National Council of Judiciary. But please look, and it happened. There were people elected to this National Council of Judiciary by the parliament, so judges, but not elected by peers, but by the members of parliament, which already put them in, let's say, political shoes. And later on, the whole machine started to operate. So the National Council of Judiciary started to produce new judges. They were filling in lower courts, but also the Supreme Court, including those two chambers that have been established. And over the time, the system started to be to change the way how the judiciary operates. So it didn't become like a politicized from the day one, but rather over the time you could feel that there are like more and more judges coming into the system that have some level of loyalty to those who appointed them into the system. And here I come to one important point I should mention, is that those reforms would not be possible if not lawyers who decided to join the project. So you didn't have just lawyers who are protesting. You also had judges who wanted to be promoted higher in a fast-track way. You also had, attorneys who wanted to become judges because there is a good opportunity not to chase for clients, but just to get a decent salary and prestige as a judge. You had, some prosecutors who wanted to resign from being prosecutors and to join a judiciary. So, so basically the ruling party used this kind of a opportunistic way of thinking of some lawyers, that they may go higher in the structure in a quicker way. So So that is the point, that you are not building this illiberal system that these are just, politicians who are administering some decisions. You must have people who are going with the tide, who are not going to resist, but who are accepting new rules of the game. And then the question is, okay, what about their ethical responsibility? What about their education? What about their integrity? What about their allegiance to constitution? You may ask number of questions, but basically it happened.
With all this happening to the structure of the judiciary, how did the Polish public respond? Were judicial reforms at the forefront of political discourse at that time, and how did that affect ultimate elections in which Law and Justice lost their majority?
I would say that there were different moments of this people's reaction to the situation. There were some successes, there were some failures, but there was also like a transformation of the protest over the time. Because in the beginning, you could see very massive protests on streets, especially those to protect the independence of the constitutional court. So the end of 2015 was really like visible. These were like 100,000 participants protests, really powerful ones. And interestingly, those protests contributed to create like the new form of social involvement. We name it so-called street opposition. So people who are basically going to streets to protest, to oppose, which was something new, because we remember that kind of a street opposition, let's say from communist period,
Right.
but not after 89. So after 89, there were no movements like this that would. So that kind of typical non-violence movements that are just simply taking on streets, and they do it in a regular way, not just one demonstration, but there are like plenty of demonstrations. 2017 was very interesting because in 2017 government has passed very quickly a law reforming the Supreme Court. And interestingly, that the law provided that the Supreme Court judges go retired by virtue of the law, and the Minister of Justice, not even President, Minister of Justice, is selecting with his basically finger, kind of a cherry picking, which judges stay.
Hmm.
So that was, and it has been passed through the parliament within a couple of days, but it was so obvious that it is against any rules, just to kick out all the judges and select those who are staying, that Polish people decided to go on streets. And can you imagine, they have organized protests in more than 200 Polish cities, and including cities in the United States. So the so-called Committee for the Protection of Democracy was making demonstrations in Chicago, in New York, I think also in LA. And why was it so important? Because on the one hand, those protests pushed the president Andrzej Duda to veto this law. So more or less, even he, who was loyal to the ruling camp, thought that it is too much, that he cannot agree on that kind of changes, and he argued that it is a strange system in which the prosecutor is selecting, judges that stay. Minister of Justice is at the same time a prosecutor general in Poland. But there was like second element which was not that much visible, because those protests create symbols, created also involvement of the young generation. It was possible also to connect the whole context of those protests with the possible exiting of Poland from the European Union. So people felt that this further attack on judiciary means that sooner or later we are going to become next Brexit country. So not Brexit, but Pol-exit country. But also those protests gave a lot of strength to judges themselves in order to resist and in order to stay on this track of protecting their own integrity. So later on, if you see any further protests, you could feel all the time like the reference to those times. I remember, just recently we had like one very symbolic moment, because one of the Polish heroes, Adam Bodnar, the guy who was a judge during solidarity times in communist era, and he has been kicked out from the judiciary for his involvement into the solidarity movement. He became an architect of the Polish justice system in '89. Later on, he became the president of the Supreme Court, like really distinguished figure. He decided also to go in front of courts and to stand with his candle and to protest against those changes. You know, it was extremely powerful. You had a guy, you know, who is over 80 years old, who is standing there, you know, with the crowd protesting. And moreover, he's the guy who is rather affiliated with, let's say, center-right, right-wing circles, being like a very strong Catholic and Christian-oriented guy. And he thought that, you know, sorry, it is going too far. So all those things created more or less symbols for us. But interestingly, over the time, when the Law and Justice continued with those reforms, this energy of protests was not that high. So it started to evaporate. It started to become become less powerful in the public discussions, and also there were other topics. Okay, so not people are not living like every day with the situation in judiciary, and even if some judges were subject of disciplinary cases, suspension cases, you know, it created attention of some people, but not of massive crowds. And to be honest, you know, there were moments of frustration. You know, I remember, you know, quite often being the ombudsman at the time that, you know, you are producing another statement, another position, another brief, and basically people are not reacting to that extent as they were doing. But what was important at that time was that Polish civil society started to transform the way of reacting. So first of all, we started to use strategic litigation of cases. So we started to bring all those cases concerning judges to the Court of Justice of the EU and the European Court of Human Rights. Second, we started to create instruments of solidarity, that those judges, prosecutors who are targeted should not be left alone. They should have all the time support from regular citizens, from academia members, from NGOs, and so on. Third, and here is, I think, extremely important element, is creating this transnational bonds of solidarity with judicial associations, but also with American Bar Association. I remember visits of ABA, observation of some disciplinary trials against some of the Polish judges. It was extremely important for them to feel that they are not alone, okay? And all of this gave a hope for the future, that, you know, one day will come that will be able to retrieve democratic values and rebuild the state. So it was not just one factor, okay? It was like the combination. On the one hand, civil society from inside, international solidarity support from outside, reaction by the European Union, you know, some opinions by specialist bodies like the Venice Commission, OSCE, you know, everybody who was more or less concerned was involved. But there was like one turning moment, in my opinion. It was 2020, because in 2020 we could feel that this judicial reform is not just an abstract thing. It is not just about, you know, some constitutional values. It has impact on like real life of citizens, because the Constitutional Court, this politicized Constitutional Court, in October 2020 issued a judgment restricting heavily access to abortion. So kind of like Polish Dobbs case. And suddenly people decided to go on streets. So women's movement started to appear strongly in the public discussion, and it has been joined also by young people. Also, in 2020, the government started to make a lot of actions against LGBT plus community.
Right.
Also against people, you know, who are protecting forests, who claimed for some, let's say, rational migration policy, who against some journalists that were doing proper investigative work. So, you know, you could see people who are subject of, you know, number of slap strategic lawsuits against public participation cases. So suddenly, people started to feel in this 2020 that this judicial reform has effect also on general society, on different segments of society. So it was, I think, important later on to move forward with the whole thing. So even if those protests maybe were not that strong, you could feel that from all those different streams of protest, you are building like the bigger river, and that this river may bring a political change one day in Poland.
And ultimately, that did happen, and the Law and Justice Party lost its majority, and you became Minister of Justice.
That is true. But I think what was important is that Polish opposition, democratic opposition, got united. So they didn't start under one flag, but basically they declared that after elections they will create a government together. There were there were two massive demonstrations in 2023. It was also important that during the period of 2020-2023, there was a very important role of the Polish Senate. Interestingly, Senate is elected in a different way than the lower chamber, because it is kind of we have 100 senators, and each is elected from its own district. And Senate was controlled already by the democratic opposition, and the Senate does not have a blocking majority, but may create like the space for NGOs, for discussion, for public debates, and it was important to give this kind of a feeling that there is this opposition. Interestingly, one of the most active senators at that time was Bogdan Klich, who is current ambassador of Poland to US. So he was very, very active in supporting civil society at that time. So basically, the Senate was a little bit like the laboratory for further for the campaign and for the further political activity after elections, and Polish voters basically gave a victory by having also the biggest turnout in elections in the Polish modern history. It was 75% of Polish population participating in elections. So it was strong, mandate for the new government to come, and unfortunately, the government started to make those changes after elections. But it appeared that it is not that easy. Okay, so to make a rule of law recovery is not that easy after this change. But we are still on track of doing things, and we hope that we'll achieve success. But for sure, the potential exiting of Poland from the EU, or potential undermining of this trust to international organizations or to our allies has gone away. We are in a completely different moment right now.
I think for our viewers might be interested in hearing more about kind of the process of restoring judicial independence after you have lost it. Because in this country we have 250 years of tradition of judicial independence. And I think a lot of people think, well, it's so entrenched here, we can't possibly lose that. But I'm not so sure. But my point is, once you've lost it, it's really hard to rebuild.
It is true that that it is a difficult exercise, because please look that this process of changes did not happen overnight. It was a long process that involved a lot of resources and a lot of people that were involved into it. So if you are having a change in the government, in the parliamentary majority, it doesn't mean that like on the next day you may just change everything. You must do it in accordance with certain procedures. You must respect constitutional values, especially if you are taking care about those constitutional values when you were fighting for this for the victory in elections. But I think there is important personal element into it, which means that people who get position in the meantime, taking this opportunistic advantage of this, let's say, lifetime chance of getting, this, let's say, fast track promotion or some nice position in a judiciary or in the prosecution service. They don't want to resign from it. It's not about, kind of a morality or integrity. If they accept it, and later on there is a change in power, they don't think about themselves in terms of honor, of making resignations, going back to, I don't know, private practice.
Mm-hmm.
Quite otherwise, they tend to protect their choices.
Right.
And moreover, if they tend to protect their choices, they try to use legal arguments and procedures in order to oppose any attempt to restore the rule of law. So in a quite cynical way, they are using some arguments in order to block you in some process of the rule of law recovery. In the Polish context, it was especially so. So just to put it like in a very straightforward way. So when I started to become a Minister of Justice, Attorney General, I faced a number of institutions that have been filled in with people maybe not loyal to the previous regime, but at least people that were uh, that were beneficiaries of the previous system. And if you are a beneficiary, then maybe you are not just directly loyal to this or the other political leader, but you are loyal to a certain vision of the world. And it means that it was extremely difficult, it is still difficult, to rebuild the system when those institutions are filled in with those people, when they have still instruments how to fight back against any process of changes. So that is like one phenomenon. Second is that to what extent you should do it in accordance, if you are making rule of law recovery, to what extent you should make it in accordance with rules, or to what extent you may, I wouldn't say bend the rules, but maybe interpret rules in such a way as to achieve a certain effect of recovering rule of law standards. So that is the dilemma between legalism, like a pure legalism, and compliance with some basic constitutional values. And we have like ongoing disputes regarding this, because it is a complex thing. Just think that judges, we have altogether in Poland more than 9,000 judges, and 3,000 of them were appointed during this last 8 years period. And moreover, within this 3,000, you have either rookie fresh judges, or you have those who just got promotion to higher instances. So you should find like a completely new way for everybody in order to make kind of a vetting, or in order to make kind of a reevaluation of their status. So it is complex exercise, but in my opinion, at the end of the day, it is about to be patient. It is about to be compliant with values. It is about having some kind of a lighthouse that would guide you, and you should be consequent in this. So fortunately, we have the jurisprudence of the European Court of Human Rights and the Court of the Court of Justice of the EU. We have those standards of the Venice Commission. We have some, general international standards, but also, in my opinion, it means a lot for politicians, because they should be a little bit self-restrictive in terms how they do it, how they talk about it. Like for example, for myself, I never ever, for this whole period of my service as the minister, criticized any judge for any judgment. I would never think about checking family life of this or the other judge. I always thought that when I'm appointing court presidents, I should give power as much as possible to judges themselves. I should, when I cooperate with prosecutors, they should talk about cases, and not me, who is just their boss, but I shouldn't basically take too much credit for their work. So I should try to build this independent judiciary. So my feeling is that this rebuilding is not just in terms of institutional design, but also in the way how you are recreating a trust into the judiciary.
That's exactly where I was going. So much of the of the independence of the judiciary rests on public trust and confidence in the judiciary. And if we start to think about judges as just being another branch of a political government, we're going to lose that trust. And that's essential to continue to protect.
Exactly. That is my point. But at the same time, we shouldn't concentrate just when we are making this rule of law recovery. We shouldn't just concentrate on this institutional rebuilding, but we should think twice. Okay, but what was the primary sin? What was the original reason that this whole situation happened? So once again, I'm coming back to this problem of efficiency of courts, to lack of proper civic education. So lack of public awareness what judges do, and also to the question of how society is participating in administering justice. So for example, when I did my job, I I put a lot of emphasis on that. At the end of the day, for the people, they might be interested in this institutional design, but they are also interested whether their cases are decided quickly.
Right.
So you should really take a lot of effort in efficiency to make at least that kind of reforms that people start to feel that the change is coming to their benefit. Or another example, in Polish system we have the status, the institution of so-called lay persons, lay judges. So like ordinary citizens who may adjudicate some cases sitting next to judges. Okay, but they were always treated in a quite, maybe not negative way, but more as a not even obstruction, but rather as somebody who is not helping, like in a proper administration of justice. That it's easier, just to make one judge panels than 3 persons panels with some lay persons. Okay. Or moreover, if you are not even investing into the status of that kind of a people, then you are not having like regular citizens, but simply people who are not having any better idea of what to do, let's say during their retirement time. Okay. So we did quite a lot of things in order to increase like the visibility of those lay persons, because we think that it is important that the judiciary should have like this regular daily contact with citizens, because at the end of the day, it is this lay person who is going to his neighbors, to his family, and saying, this judge, he's doing, it was a complex case, and he's doing job. Everything is much more complicated than the media present the story. So this contact with the society is extremely important.
It's an interesting point that you raised, because we have the same kind of issue here with our jury system, and the fact that people come to serve as jurors means they are involved in the justice system and are invested in it, and they have to trust the judge and the system entirely to build that and maintain that support. Well, I think we come to a point where the story is not ended in Poland yet. It's not ended in the United States yet either, and maintaining the independence of the judiciary and the rule of law is a task that requires continued work and surveillance and building trust in the system. I'd like to close by asking what advice you would have for American lawyers, judges, and anybody in the United States who's interested in preserving the rule of law and the independence of the judiciary. What advice would you have for our viewers on what they can do to protect these institutions?
I think that we should understand that times have changed, and we are not living in a traditional times where the model of liberal democracy is understood and respected by everybody. It is to a great extent a result of social change, technological change, but also social media impact on our lives, which has an impact on political landscape, on polarization, but also on the way how we conduct discussions. And in such a situation, when we know it, and it is not any different for Poland, US, Netherlands, I don't know, Finland, we should start to think, okay, but what is maybe our other additional role as professionals next to what we are doing within our traditional capacity. And our additional role is that because we are experts in how the law operates, how institutions do their work, we should use our knowledge in order to get to citizens with this knowledge, in order to explain them this fabric of the whole system, the operation of the whole system. So we should try to think out of box what each of us may do in order to contribute to sharing the public awareness and understanding of the whole legal system. Because at the end of the day, the rule of law should have its defenders, but defenders should be like regular citizens, not just institutions from the top. It should go from the bottom. And I remember that one of the crucial moments for us were not just those protests, but also moments where Polish lawyers, for example, started to be engaged into making short movies portraying why independent court matters to a daily living. And you have it here in the US in the public culture. You have it in movies. You have it in Sesame Street, even when there is this when Justice Sotomayor is explaining to Elmo why judges and courts should be independent and what is the value of adjudicating cases. But it should be massive. Okay, it is this moment when each of us should think how to build like massive structures for that kind of civic education and involvement. And the second point is that if there is anybody who is left behind because of the history, because of the political tensions, because of some aggressive policies, nobody should be left behind. Everybody should have a solidarity support. And I don't mean here, some money support, and I don't mean here some material structures. I just mean here that this person should feel that he's not alone in this endeavor, that protecting integrity and basic values means that other citizens respect him. And here I would like to come back to one of the most important lessons for me from Timothy Snyder. He has written a book, 20 Lessons from 20th Century. And there is the lesson number 2, which is named Protect Institutions. And he says more or less like this, that each of us should select one institution that he or she takes care of. Whether it is the newspaper, whether it is the court, whether it is the ombudsman, whether it is trade union, okay? And I think that taking care about like regular citizens of courts, of prosecutors, is of utmost importance. They should feel that they have this like a regular popular support of people, that people stand behind their shoulders.
Well, I think that's a great call to action for all our viewers to heed to. And again, I thank you for your time and for your insights and for telling us the remarkable and as yet to be told the end of story of the judicial reform in Poland. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mark. Thank you.